Hey there and welcome to my first sew along video. My channel is pretty eclectic. There's a lot of music and other stuff, but today I'm really venturing out into the sewing branch of things because that's been my passion this year and continues to be. So I'm gonna have a sewing playlist. So in this sew along, we're gonna be sewing the McCalls 7835, and that is the gown I'm wearing right now. Let me give you a better look. This version of the dress is obviously floor length, and I've lengthened the skirt and the ruffle for an elegant evening gown effect. I hope you enjoy joining me on the journey through making this dress, the highs, the lows, the victories, the challenges. I can't wait to hear from you too, so please leave me a comment and let me know how your project is going. So I've got two front bodice pieces that look like this, and I've got two back bodice pieces that look like this. I've interfaced the back with a stretch interfacing, a knit interfacing, because this fabric stretches. It stretches down the grain line, which I didn't expect. I thought it was going to be stretchy that way. It's stretchy this way. We're going to work with that. So my first steps here after the interfacing are going to be to stitch my darts in the bodice fronts, and then I'm going to sew these pieces together in the fronts. So I'm going to be stitching them together like that, but like that, of course, so that the seam allowances will be on the inside. Also, important step here is to leave this open at the top here. So I have my bodice piece with the dart sewn and attached at center front. I left the opening at the top per instructions, and that is important because it comes up later when it's time to assemble this with the lining. I'm going to be attaching my back bodice pieces, which are interfaced, to the front. Like so. There we go. Just like that. I'm going to be stitching down 5/8 seam allowance on that side and that side. So I took a moment to try this on and wrapped it around me. It is going to be tight, but I think it's going to be flattering for the look I'm going for and for the dress I'm making. This is what the back looks like now, the inside of the exterior. So we've got the seams ironed open, and we're ready to go on to the next step. Going to be stay stitching the armhole edges of the bodice. I went ahead and treated my lining pieces the same way as I did my exterior piece, and I have, sewn the darts, sewn the seams, ironed them open on the other side. I also took some time and installed these ribbons for easier hanging when this dress is finished, and I also put on my tag. It's the very first time I've used one of these. They just got in the mail, came in the mail the other day, so that was pretty exciting. Let's turn it around and see what we're doing on the other side. So now is the time to install the boning, and I've also decided to add cups. The instructions don't explicitly call for cups, but I like them on this dress for me. I'm going to be basically tacking them down with anchoring stitches, just here, and maybe one more place. We'll see. And then I'll be installing the boning, so I'm going to be rounding these edges. Right now they're square at the ends, and so I'll be cutting them so they're round, trimming them up a bit, and then I'll be placing the boning like so. There's going to be one, the short ones are going to go here. They go between the seam. I'm going to go ahead and, it said to iron those open, but for this I'm going to do that. So I'm going to put one here. I'm going to put one here. I'm going to put one, that long one, Where's the long? Yeah, that's the long one. The long one's gonna go in the middle. And then these are gonna go here and here. I'm going to be ironing them down one more time, flatten them out a little bit. And then once I have flattened them sufficiently and rounded the corners and shortened up the plastic bits a bit, I'm going to be sewing them down around onto the seam like this. The seam will be in the center. I'll be sewing all around, anchoring them down in place. And here is the finished lining with the boning and the bust cups installed into place. I've cut out my 4 armband sections. I've interfaced 2 of them. And now I'm going to be turning in the seam allowance on the lower edge of all of these armbands. So I'm going to be turning it up 5/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to be pressing that. And then I'm going to be trimming that seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch on each one of these pieces. So here are my 4 armband pieces that have the bottom turned up 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and there are my armbands ready to go with the shortened 3/8 of an inch seam allowance folded over. Okay, so the next step involves pinning the armbands that are interfaced to the bodice. We do that right sides together and matching symbols. So I have a 1 triangle here and I have 1 triangle here. It's faint, but it's there. And so basically I'm going to be lining up the symbols and pinning it in place, preparing to sew it. Baste and then stitch. So I've secured my underarm to my armbands, and I'm going to go ahead and do that to my lining as well. Okay, so now I'm going back to step 10, and I'm going to be doing this to both the bodice and the bodice lining. So on step 10, what we do is turn in seam and seam allowance on armhole edge of bodice, clipping where necessary, baste, and then press. And so what they're wanting me to do is to turn in this seam allowance here on the armhole, and I am going to have to clip to get it to lay flat. So as you can see, I've clipped, pressed, and basting stitched all of my underarm seam allowances down on both my lining piece and my bodice piece. Okay, so this is a really exciting point in the project. I'm going to be connecting the tops of this to this. They need to be facing right sides together. And now I'm just pinning everything together along that outside edge so I can prepare to join the 2 pieces with a nice clean seam. So I'm going to be stitching all around here with a 5/8 seam allowance. At this point, I'm going to pivot and then come up all around there. So I've completed that outside stitch. One thing I ended up doing was basting. I used a large stitch from about here to about here to test. I wasn't sure how deep to go with the V, where I know you're supposed to pivot the circle, but anyway, I'm glad I did the basting stitch because I went too deep. So now I'm just taking out the basting stitches I did. Afterward, I went back with a 2.5 millimeter stitch and got this transition here much better. Turned it right side out before I understitch the lining just to make sure it's going well. And I do like the shape. I think it's looking really good, but I do have a little issue I want to resolve before I close it up. My seams right where I have that circle, this pivot point, are coming open a little bit. So I need to really go in and even if I use a, hand stitch it, I need to get those closed from the other side. So I'm gonna work on that. Okay, so I was able to fix this up. It looks a lot better now. I feel very good that that's secure. There's no gaping holes. It's nice, and the threads in there are nice and tight. I did them with my hand stitching. And normally probably don't have to do that, but I had to do it just because I had a little open gap right here and I was having trouble, couldn't really access it very well with the machine. So I went in with a hand sew, and just hand sewed that. And then over here on this side, I also tightened up. There was a little hole right here, and I basically like went in through, you won't be able to see that, but I went in through the little tack stitches I had with the bust caps, and went in through there, and then went up over here and sort of stitched that up a little bit, covered up the black stitching too, and then as much as I could, and then came out the other side. All fixed up, really, really pleased with the way this is looking. And I'm ready to understitch my lining and band facings. So I finished the understitching of the lining. Next step is going to be slip stitching together the other sides of the armband, the ones that I pressed earlier and snipped down to that 3/8 inch seam allowance. And also the underarms here will also be slip stitched together as well. So I'm gonna go do that with my thread and needle. I decided to add some length to the skirt piece, so I inserted a paper measuring 8 3/4 between the below the lengthen line, the length and shorten line on that skirt. I've got all my darts stitched up, and the next step is to stitch skirt back sections together at the center back within 1 inch of large circle. I'm going to skip that step. I'm going to end up stitching my back up after I install the zipper, but I am going to go ahead and stitch skirt back to skirt front at sides. So I'm going to pin that up and then sew it up. Okay, so I have prepared my exterior skirt material here. I've sewn the darts in, I've attached the sides to the front, and I've ironed down my darts and seam allowances, and I've done the same here with my lining. So the next step is going to be, with wrong sides together, pin lining to skirt matching centers. Baste upper edges together between small circles. So my circles are about here, and the same over here to this side. So the next step is open out bodice lining, pin skirt to bodice, matching centers, stitch between small circles, stitch from small circles to opening edges, keeping skirt lining free. Press seam toward bodice. So I'm going to first stitch between the circles at a 5/8 seam allowance, stitching the bodice to both the lining and the exterior of the skirt. Then I'm going to stitch from outer circles to the edges, but excluding the lining on that part. Okay, so I attached my bodice to my skirt. I ended up going back and trying to center the middle more. I started out with a basting stitch and then stitched it in place. It looked good to me when I had the basting stitch in, and then when I stitched it in place again, it finally again, because I had seam ripped that section, there is a slight place that it does not line up there, and it also does not quite line up there. So it took me a couple of tries, but I ended up seam ripping out again my waistline, and now I've got it pretty well lined up for the most part. Really, really close. Close enough. And the ends are, basically lined up now. So I have my zipper attached with pins. I'm gonna baste it in on both sides, and then I'm gonna make sure I can zip up this dress. I've gone through a lot with the zipper. Finally got it. Got it worked out, I think. I basted this for probably the 4th time, and I used interfacing this time. A nice, thick interfacing, a sturdy interfacing iron-on, and now I'm ready to sew in the zipper for real and get this part done. Okay, so it looks like my zipper foot. This is actually my first time sewing a garment using an invisible zipper foot. Usually I just use a zipper foot. It actually sewed into my zipper tape at a point or two, but for the most part it's good. So I'm gonna go over those parts and re-sew those parts, but I went ahead and ripped those sections, and my zipper is zipping up real good. I'm going to fix the spots that were weird with the thing going into the zipper tape and just sew in the right place, and then I'm going to go ahead and close up my gap here, sew that all together from the inside, and then attach my zipper tails to the seam allowance on the inside. So I have stitched my zipper tails to the bottom of my seam allowance here inside. Now what I'm doing is I'm making this a finished edge with my lining and my lining and my exterior like nice and finished. So what I'm needing to do is, what I'm doing is a little different than the instructions, a little tiny bit different. So I'm flipping this over, and I'm having a little challenge of where to fold it because I just made a mistake. I had to undo it, but I'm gonna be trying again. And I'm gonna baste the top just to make sure I'm in the right spot, and then flip it out and make sure it looks good. But basically I'm just going to be sewing the lining here, lining up the raw edges and sewing to the left of my zipper tape down to here where I'm having the lining flip up at the waist. Just a bit like that, so it will be, when I slip stitch, it'll line up. So here goes try number 2. I ended up redoing these. I realized for the first time, because I've only done lining on dress a couple times, that it's very, very important that this is correct, that the lining turns over exactly at the right place, because if it doesn't, these don't line up, especially when you use a bit up, and I want them to line up. So I did it until I got it right. And now I've got my hook and eye, and I'm going to install them to the back opening edges above the zipper, like it has in the picture. That was labor intensive. It took me a few tries. This is my first hook and eye, but I got it on there. I might use a thread that blends in with the lining next time, but it's my first effort. I'll show you what it looks like from the outside. Here's the outside. There's a little gap there, but it's as close as I think I'm gonna get it today. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna take the raw edges here and run them through my serger. Watch that, I have more work to do on my interior with my lining. So I need to turn in the edges on this lining and line it up with the zipper tape, and I'm going to need to also stitch this to the end here. But I'm gonna need to slip stitch this to my zipper tape to the end. But before I do that, I also need to sew up the rest of my lining skirt at 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I'll probably do that part first, and then I'll work on the slip stitching the lining to the zipper tape. And then I also need to slip stitch my upper bodice to the waistband. So I've got some work to do. I finished off cleaning up the inside of the dress. The lining is now sewn in, and I'm excited about progress. I'm gonna try it on, make sure it's still looking good, and then I'm gonna start serging the bottom. I've serged the bottom edge of my dress of the exterior layer, and I've also prepared my ruffle. For the most part, it's all stitched together. I went ahead and serged the part that's going to be attaching to the bottom of the skirt. And I do have my basting stitches in for the gathers. I'm going to be tightening those up a little bit. And then I'm going to be following step 20, which is pinning the ruffle to the lower edge of the dress, of course, right sides together, placing one seam at the center back and the remaining seams at the small circles. So I'm gonna basically put my dress into thirds. I actually measured the circle here of the skirt and it was 36 inches. So I just divided that by 3, 12, 12, and 12. So 3 sections of equal distance on the skirt, and I am now, and that's where I put my skirt ruffle seams, to those 3 points of equidistance. And now I'm basically adjusting my gathers. So I have to tighten up my gathers and adjust them, and then I'm gonna be pinning them to the skirt. Well, I've got my dress behind me, and all that's left is to hem it. I'm gonna hem the bottom of the ruffle here, and then I'm gonna figure out what to do with the bottom of the lining. I'll probably hem it, but I'm thinking maybe I'll also like tack it down to some of the seam lines inside, so it doesn't flip up as I'm putting it down. Because this is a snug fit. I tried it on last night. It looks amazing. Can't wait to show it to you after I finish it up. Just a couple last steps here. I decided to slip stitch my skirt lining into the edge that was sticking up from the gathered fabric. So basically that's what I'm doing. I'm on the last little bit. Now I'm almost done with my skirt. Here's my my hemmed bottom of the ruffle. This is the first time I've sewn a hemmed from the top, which is I guess what you're technically supposed to do, and it's a little further from the top of this than I would like, but I ironed it down really nicely, and if it pops up, if it causes any trouble, I'll just add an additional stitch above it to hold it down better. But hey, first time for everything. Well, I finished my dress. I haven't tried it on yet since I've done all this slip stitching, but yes, I've slip stitched the skirt lining to the top of that ruffle that was inside the skirt, and so now both of those are hidden, which is pretty cool. This is definitely the most elaborate dress I've made. A lot of details in this. The boning, lots of slip stitching, the giant ruffle, the bust cups, the fabric. I'm gonna go try it on. Thank you so much for joining me on my first sew along video. I hope it was fun for you to watch. It was definitely fun for me to make. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.